Cause, like substance, is a notion much criticized by modern philosophers and sometimes discarded by them. The most usual and flimsy of their criticisms are psychological. When facts have been reduced to human perceptions, that is, to illusions, it is easy to reduce the pregnancy of facts to human superstition, namely, the expectation of any sequence once observed among them. But this whole psychological web is artificial. It is the literary dress given by half-hearted critics to a subjectivism not nakedly presentable. The actual perceptions of any individual are few and not exactly repeated. Those he can remember are even fewer, and most confused and distorted. Far from identity of objects being imagined by mankind to express the similarity of their repeated perceptions, these repeated perceptions, though actually very diverse, are assimilated by the cursory psychologist when he knows that they are directed upon the same object. Moreover, even if the psychology of these critics had been frank and sound, they could never have made a good physics out of it. A supposed rule, such as the natural philosophy of psychologists is based on, that the same phenomena follow upon one another, is futile. There are no same phenomena. It is only natural objects and the ways of nature that endure after a fashion and may be recognized. But nature is not composed, like the minds known to philosophers, of a series of discrete ideas, succeeding and repeating one another. Nature is an infinite, irrecoverable flux of matter, never falling into precisely the same conjunction twice, never arresting its phases absolutely, nor halting between them. A material flux involving another equally continuous of the relations that are predictable from time to time among its parts, while this morphological flux in turn carries a third discontinuous flux upon it, that of the interests and ideas belonging to such of those morphological units are as fitfully conscious and troubled about their destiny. In this incidental play of consciousness, the most superficial stratum of nature is taken for the whole of it. We need not wonder if the natural sense for that force is perplexed which secretly propels the world. It is only in the flux of matter, or in the reference to this flux, that there are any laws, and when the existence of matter is denied and laws are sought among the random pictures in sense, it is no marvel that laws are not found, for the alleged inductions based on repetitions in experience are either pathological, a single striking instance leading a helpless mind to fear or hope it shall be repeated, or else they are not inductions but shrewd discoveries of some part of the mechanism of nature. If the psychological critics of causation have sometimes retained their hold on natural laws, as Mill usually did, it has been only by an inconsequence. They have availed themselves of such convenient equivocations as the one contained in the word phenomenon, which, when they are psychological critics, means some essence momentarily given in sense, but when they are naturalists means some part of the material world, conceived in its natural setting. The rainbow, for instance, is a phenomenon, but between the apparition of that aesthetic essence in the sensibility of Noah and its reapparition in that of the lake poets, there is no psychological connection. Such apparitions, even if all mankind were counted in, would have no continuity, derivation, regularity, or proportion. Mill, however, having dutifully called the rainbow a phenomenon to salve his subjectivist conscience, would at once have begun to discuss the substances that produced it, vapors and refracted light, and the rest, and forgetting he was an idealist, he might have given us some instruction about the constitution of nature and the causes of our perceptions. Nearer to the heart of the subject come those criticisms of causation which are based on the temporal relation of cause to effect. It would seem that when the cause is given, the effect, if it be one, should immediately ensue, or rather should have ensued already. If, to avoid this, we suppose an interval between the maturity of the cause and the production of the effect, another cause must determine the length of this interval, and the same difficulty would reoccur about the operation of this ancillary cause, which pulls the trigger. Like most honest difficulties in philosophy, this arises from a too human view of nature. Nature is the realm of derivation. It is all process and genesis. And in this sense, everything in nature has a cause. Everything flows from something else. Niagara shows but an infinitesimal part of the force, persistence, and volume of that universal cataract. But this voluminous stream is undivided. Its operation is equable, pervasive, mechanical. The units which we are apt to call causes, on the contrary, as well as all those we call effects, are phenomenal, verbal, moral units. They are concretions in discourse. They violate the lines of cleavage in nature, substituting others made from a human point of view and in a violent moral perspective. They couple directly things disparate and remote in their real genealogy. As astrology referred human dispositions to stellar conjunctions, so human wit still astrologizes in its daily business, in its reading of personal and moral forces. Thus, we may say, not without a certain feminine shrewdness, that the cause of this indigestion was lobster, and the cause of that suicide was love. But lobster is usually digestible, and love curable, and all that comes of such casual divinations is a true sense for the general place of the cause and a propensity to haste and passion in specifying that cause precisely. Every doctor has his special bugbears and nostrums. Every religion has its particular narrow path. In morals and even in knowledge of the world, much is hot-headed and fanciful. The diagnosis of society is hopelessly difficult, because the terms in which we are forced to make it are captious, which is not to say that nature has not a precise constitution or life, no general direction in which alone it may be lived with safety. Reality has a bias, an unequivocal order, which may be roughly but substantially indicated by popular wisdom. To come to close quarters with causes, however, it would be necessary to penetrate to the mechanism of matter. There we should see what in the lobster deranged the stomach, and in what way and what physiological complications made love violent and ineradicable, ultimately diverting the impulse to embrace a particularly lovely creature into an impulse to drown one's miserable self. For these revulsions and expedients of passion invade consciousness in a kaleidoscopic way, fatally or spontaneously, i.e., physiologically brought about, like the shifts in dreams. The ideal dramatic machinery of motives, passions, and reasons by which such shifts may be expressed or justified is fiction after the fact. A rhetorical embroidery in which deep-lying natural propensities and crises are clothed in the actor's fancy. If we consider events discreetly, like statues in a park, we may well say that if we do not touch, there must be a void space between them. The cause must either have produced the effect already, or does not suffice to produce it at all. Or if, marching on bravely in the path of subjectivism, we try to frame a law that events shall produce their effects telepathically, at the exact distance, let us say, of 9 months, we may perhaps be overlooking some discoverable intermediaries, and we shall arrive in the end at a savage caricature of nature. Idealism is indeed in many ways the expression of primitive bewilderment, returning after a long acquaintance with nature, and therefore possessed of articulate ideas to criticize, and of habits of thought and presumptions by which to criticize them. It is mere superstition to attribute one event to the magic influence of another, however constant the conjunction may be reputed to be between them. Were such a coincidence established by 10,000 instances, it would remain a conjunction of appearances, to be explained by some continuous flux of substance beneath. The breaking of innumerable waves in similar fashion, one after another, does not establish a causal influence of each upon the next. It invites the naturalist to study the origin of each wave out of the constant properties of water, the steady force of the wind, the conformation of the shore, for if these true causes varied, the previous successive breaking of an infinite number of waves would have no tendency to provoke the swelling and breaking of one wave more. The generations of animals and their habits have no magic tendency to mirror themselves on the principle that what has been shall be. Such a way of thinking is not science but omen reading and slack gnomic wisdom. Generations resemble one another so long as they are supported and compacted by the same equilibrium of material forces. This material equilibrium is not absolutely constant. Therefore, the types and habits of animals change more or less quickly, and all of the now observable phenomena of nature, by the very force of nature, are destined to disappear. We have meager reports of what life has been like on earth for a few thousand years, and many of them have already become almost unintelligible. Yet our empirical philosophers pretend to demonstrate the uniformity of nature on that evidence, while other philosophers prove to their own satisfaction that experience must always have the same character and marches towards a goal which they can discern. In truth, if we could look again into the world in some million years, if we found an earth at all, we should no more find the present animals in it than we should find the present languages. For words, too, like other natural facts, do not repeat themselves magically ad infinitum in the same sequences, but are formed and combined afresh on each occasion. Experience is like literature, superficial, highly qualified, quite unreproducible outcome of very complex processes of matter. There are no more constant sequences in experience than there are constant sequences in words. Certain phrases, certain idioms, recur often in certain circles for a certain time. Then that eddy in the stream of life is obliterated, and nature continues her steady, unmindful career. Not long ago, what we call language and what we call experience did not exist. Soon both will have disappeared, and we cannot tell what similar or dissimilar expressions the movement of nature may bring with it subsequently, as we cannot tell what expression she found in earlier times. The psychological habit of regarding sensations as fundamental facts has created a special puzzle about the relations of body and mind. If the constant antecedents of a phenomenon are its causes, it would seem that any constant accompaniment of the antecedent is a part of it, and therefore of the cause. So that a feeling of relief, if it is always accompanied the rise of temperature above the freezing point, would be a part of the cause of the melting snow that will ensue. Absurdity in the attribution of causes is so habitual to mortals that to attribute causal influence to feelings hardly seems a paradox to them. They may not always say that a feeling of relief can help to melt snow, but they commonly say that mind influences body, which is the same thing put more vaguely. An ancient and rooted fallacy lies at the basis of all this confusion about causes. People who might not say that snow can be melted by a feeling of relief say with conviction that a feeling of pain will draw the hand away from the fire. Why this diverse appreciation of cases perfectly similar materially? Simply because they are not similar morally. By the operation of mind, ever since Anaxagoras and Socrates, people have understood a moral or useful direction impressed obviously, though miraculously, on things. They do not take mind in the psychological sense of an actual evanescent consciousness of anything. The power of reason, the obedience of nature to the excellences it should produce is what impresses them. Or to have such interest as they have is a point left unconsidered. How, having somehow taken shape, these minds provoke corresponding changes in matter, without in the least conceiving the means or mechanism of those changes, is unconsidered too. But the miracle of an ultimate harmony becomes its own excuse for being, and habit and language make the magic of it familiar and therefore unquestioned. Eventual values are called final causes, and the name of cause is not misused, although the cause here precedes its effect in time. If by that word we understand, like the ancients, any principle of explanation, any circumstance that may help the human mind to find its quietus in the presence of facts, value is such a circumstance. An initial failure to understand the relation of values to natural existence has led mankind into two bypaths without issue. One, the attribution of final causes, by which nature is explained by the supposed power of the good; the other, the problem of evil, in which, seeing that the good does not prevail, an explanation is sought for the fact on the principle that, somehow, the good prevails notwithstanding. The ingrained habit of attributing power to wishes and thoughts has contributed to the notion, not countenanced at all by the actual methods of nature, that a cause is a detached fact with a concrete message or behest, which its effect will presently fulfill. Nature has been conceived as a sort of demoniac society in which 1,000 incantations and bewitchments crossed each other, each a motive, a virtue, an influence, and to understand anything was to distribute the responsibility for it among these various magical agents. Existence was a battlefield of actions and passions, in which nothing was more normally efficacious than wish, word, and prayer. In this Neoplatonic Babel we have been reared, and it is no marvel if we cannot readily learn the language of nature. By causes we ordinarily understand such particular things of discourse, endowed with specific aerial powers, and it is against this remnant of magic that the criticism of causation, when scientific, has been directed, and hence too the ill repute that has fallen on the word cause among scientific people. The flux of matter is the ground of the morphological and of the psychic flux, but even here the propriety of calling the material flux the cause of the other two is dubious. Each posture of matter does not precede the truths or the consciousness which may express it, nor does it pass into them, nor spend any part of its energy in giving them birth. They arise and vanish with its self-contained transformations, as unanimity may arise and vanish with the successive phases of a friendship. That the relations embodied in flux are embodied in it inevitably, without exhausting or appropriating the least part of its matter or energy, is perhaps already obvious to the reader. It is impossible to imagine a more direct dependence of one thing on another, and yet the word cause seems out of place to describe the relation between a closed mechanism and the perfectly ideal forms which it realizes from moment to moment. The relation of the material flux to consciousness is more difficult to understand, since it is a natural and contingent relation, and the second term of it is not implied in the mere existence of the first. That a consciousness which may lapse altogether should accompany some of the figures in the morphological flux, raising them to an actual and living expression, and clothing them in a new and variegated plumage, is a quite unexpected redundancy in nature. Matter happens to have this sort of fertility when it has fallen into certain shapes. The consciousness of animals hypostasizes into psychic acts some of the morphological relations into which matter falls as it flows. Pleasures, ideas, meanings, emotions, these facts are actual and self-existent. Their number and order, unlike the number and order of morphological units, is fixed and unambiguous. This psychic lightning, since it flashes out of certain motions in the cloud of matter, might well be said to depend on them and be an extraneous effect which has them for its cause. But if we adopted this language, we should have to remove from the notion of causation the suggestion of an identical substance, or force passing from an earlier to a later arrangement. The psychic expression of life is contemporary with its material phases, and it is in itself perfectly unsubstantial, evanescent, inconsequential, and impotent. It is no continuation of the same process that goes on in a body, no transformation of the same energy. It is a spirit brooding over the waters, and the principle on which it arises here and not there, and reveals this sensuous quality and not that, is a mysterious corollary to the morphology of animal life. The vital spark flies when flint and steel strike together, and its color and heat correspond precisely, though in heterogeneous terms, to certain circumstances in the world of friction. The spiritual radiation of material life might be called, in some senses, an effect of it. It is a discrete fact always attached to a different discrete fact, but the relation is not one of succession, but of simultaneity. So that philosophers to whom time seems substantial might be rather inclined to say that the bodily movement and its psychic expression were parts of the same event, and not causally related. Only it would then have to be admitted that only a part, the material part, of such an event showed any qualitative or quantitative continuity with what came before or after, the continuations of mental life being spasmodic, precarious, and imperfect, as is the brightness of an arc light, which does not follow with historical propriety on its previous brightness, but spurts or goes out most inconsequentially according to the state of the batteries and the wires. There is much there is much justification in calling the constellation of matter which any form of animation accompanies the cause of this animation, for the dependence is complete and unilateral, yet the element of succession is absent, the terms being simultaneous, and it is consequently more proper to name the feelings that arise, the expression or entelechy or hypostasis of the bodily situation, and this the organ or instrument of the actual consciousness. For we must remember that while in the order of Genesis consciousness is the last, most unsubstantial, and most fugitive of beings, it is first in the order of discovery and its intensity of being, so much so that, from its point of view, the whole realm of matter may be called merely potential, until actualized, discovered, and brought to a head in experience. The situation is incompatible with another implication, besides that of succession, which is involved in the word cause. Cause is often thought to possess a greater dignity or comprehensiveness than the effect, to be the elder and nobler possessor of all that flows from it, at once a father and a model, now mind, while simpler structurally than its ground, which could not otherwise be the ground of everything in it, by its very concision and symbolism adds a new wealth to nature, the warmth of life, and the vicissitudes of good and evil, while the infinite complexities of matter are without intrinsic value, and can be called good only for the mind's sake, when they produce or entertain it worthily. Within the mechanical flux, again, to speak of causes and effects is beside the point. All the elements of the material world are original, its law is constant, and the possibility of calculating any posture of it is equal in any direction. No part or phase of substance is responsible for any other, or nearer to the ground of things. Causes are not assigned in those parts of nature, like the solar system, where the mechanism lies revealed. The laws of motion are not causes but descriptions, and the earlier motions are not causes of the latter but other parts of the same continuum of motions. Motion would be impossible if there had to be a static cause for it. It simply exists. And as the most infinitesimal motion is already a transition, so the most elaborate evolution is only one movement. Its earlier parts are not the cause, but only the beginning of the latter ones. There is a sort of dynamic democracy in nature, where influence and obedience are alike pervasive. It is only when we veil and divide the mechanism of nature in terms of our senses and interests that causes and effects become distinguishable. But then we have passed from the realm of matter and of science to that of appearance and discourse. We consider the fate of animals or of political and moral units. The steady and passionless flux of matter comes to be divided in our apprehension into propitious or fatal influences, defining them by their relation to the moral realities they support. Thus the turns and twists of life become referable to causes, as malaria is referable to mosquitoes, or the fall of one country to the rise of another. These are conventional or rhetorical units, and the whole sense of which history is full of competing possibilities, interests, and forces, has only a poetic sort of truth. In this way, the thought of writing a letter, writing it accordingly, and a friend receiving it in Australia may be called each the cause of the other, but not seriously, for the thought does not assure the writing, save on the hypothesis that the psychological mechanism works in an exemplary manner, so that no intention arises which is not prophetic of an operation actually to take place. This effect would not ensure if the man was scatterbrained, or if some change had occurred in his environment or in his body to change his mind, or if he had died or lost his memory, both being primarily chance turns in his material organism. Nor would the letter, if written, have reached its destination and the cognizance of that Australian if the ship that carried it had sunk, or pitch from the hand of malicious persons had defiled it in the post box. So that these social events, the thought, the writing, and the receiving, though in a given state of society usually ensuing upon one another, have no power and have even no tendency to produce each other directly. They are mere signs or omens indicating that if the mechanism of the world continues to operate in a certain way, these events will emerge from it, not from each other at the customary intervals. Ideal units, such as a man's country, are always being conceived or felt without ever existing naturally. What is covered by them is a mass of matter, loosely delimited, and offering to the imagination an always different but somewhat continuous series of beauties, facilities, and comforts. Moral geography is compacted of myths. Consciousness, though almost entirely ignorant of the material reactions and issues of which it is the voice, is not ignorant that it bears some message, that it is burdened with a mighty announcement, and it finds terms of its own, like the prophet and the poet that it is, for this oracular communication. These terms are the secondary and the tertiary qualities of things. Like colors, or like the gods of Olympus, they clothe, vivify, and hide the mechanism for which they stand, in so far as they have a natural signification at all. They thereby reveal the world and its ways with a vague, redundant, practical truth shrouded in symbols. On this level, the attribution of causes properly flourishes. It is necessarily somewhat arbitrary, and the same field may be traversed with equal discernment by a great number of these shrewd philosophies. We cannot say, for instance, that the attribution of motives to men is always inapt. The motives attributed are sometimes those which these men would attribute to themselves and think they were governed by. But even when avowed, motives are only symbols. What gives a man these motives, and these motives their skill and power, is something deeper and undistinguished. So the feminine art of assigning causes is not wholly fallacious if we take it for what it is worth. It never reaches the true basis and generative motion of anything, but it often suggests what has occurred on the social level with which it deals, and it describes the possible vicissitudes of destiny in a rapid and dramatic way. The causes of things which a cursory observer can assign are accordingly mere arbitrary and exchangeable units of a literary sort, behind which the flux of substance is going on, altogether too minute, complex, and voluminous for sense or language to trace it. Mankind accordingly live and talk in a sort of dream. All our familiar terms and images are masks, and the personage behind them all is always the same, an infinite, ceaseless, infinitesimal flux of matter, grounding and imposing these interesting appearances on us for a while with a treacherous monotony. They are not the units of its own movement. The morphological accident which supported them may therefore suddenly lapse. The appearance will collapse with it into a disconcerting and almost incredible nothingness. But the flux of matter will go on unperturbed, ready to dance elsewhere to some other tune. The interdependence of facts by which one may be inferred from another is of three sorts, to none of which the term causation can be applied without qualification. First, there is the coherence of the universal material mechanism, which, wherever it is sufficiently known, enables us to calculate past, future, or unknown parts of a system from those that are given. Second, there is the extraneous and unilateral dependence on this mechanism of psychic life, translating certain conjunctions in this mechanism into picturesque and dramatic intuitions, without any transmission of substance or motion into that apparition. Third, there is a superficial, imputed, and apparently magical connection between units of discourse when the course of nature happens to have brought them to light in somewhat similar couples several times in succession. The critics of causation have therefore in each of these regions plenty to occupy them and to justify their enlightened skepticism. The terrible propulsion, the infinite pregnancy of nature is not thereby removed. What the formulas of mechanism describe is a method of transition, like motion in a straight line. The terms of this calculation already contain in them the miracle of change, the fact of universal unrest, portent of destiny, and if this fatality is calculable, if it is a beautifully mathematical flux, that circumstance cannot arrest it, or hasten or delay a single one of the perhaps momentous things it must bring to light. The sense of dependence, therefore, and the sense of connection between past and future are amply justified. When men look for causes, they are wisely studying the ways of nature and fortifying their minds with all possible arts and all necessary resignation. These causes can never be truly found, however, so long as appearances are not first reduced to the terms of substance, and the mechanism of this substance is not disclosed. For this reason, only the exact physical and mathematical sciences can make any solid progress. In the others, the superficial plane of inquiry forbids all thorough understanding of the actual methods of change. In Darwinism, for instance, natural history seemed to take a great step forward, and so indeed it did, in that it conceived the possibility of reducing the superficial fact of diverse species and the adaptation of their organs to one another and to the environment to the mechanical influence of selection by death. Nevertheless, as the exact method of this selection was not traced so as to become calculable mathematically, as the exact origin of variations also remained unexplored, the positive gain and even the scientific tendency of Darwinism could come to be doubted, and it has not prevented a relapse into vitalism in some half-scientific quarters. The argument has even been heard that the sciences of life required a different method, because the mechanical method had not succeeded in dealing with them. These sciences of life, however, are only the vague impressions and dreams of people unable to understand what occurs in nature. Astronomy was once a science of life, of that of the beasts of the zodiac, or of the divine children of heaven. Natural history, psychology, and all other fields where observation remains superficial can be distributed only into impressionist units and described in rhetorical terms, so long as the substantial movement and interconnection of their objects is not discovered. If that should occur, however, the sciences of life would really begin to exist, because the mechanism of life would begin to be clear. Such understanding of nature everywhere on the material plane, with its universal order and consecutiveness, would not destroy, of course, the appearances from which human investigation must start. Astronomical appearances endure, and so vital appearances always will, but if they were understood, they would cease to be confused with powers or causes, and to the great gain of the spirit, they would be recognized as that coinage of the brain which fancy is very cunning, and as the ghosts disappeared, poetry would come into its own. The notion that events have causes is inevitable and very true. Felix que potuit rerum cognoscere causas. The proof lies in the possibility of art and prophecy, e.g., by bringing logs together and setting them up. With due precautions, a hut can be built. In time, A fire or a storm may destroy that shelter. The operation of building is a mode in the flux of substance, which as it passes leaves as a sort of sediment another mode of substance called the hut, in which change, although not really absent, has another and much less obvious rhythm for human observation. Building is not what psychologism would make of it, one phenomenon, a set of muscular and optical sensations, followed by other phenomena, occasional vistas of a hut. Building is a system of conspiring motions in matter which in themselves set up the hut and leave it standing, the substance of the hut being a part of the substance concerned in those previous motions. When the fire or the flood comes, which is another stream of matter endowed with a different motion, it engages in its own rhythm the substance of the hut which had attained such a placid equilibrium, either carrying it away in great fragments or subtly transforming its molecular motion into what is called flame. The hut has become smoke and ashes, or rubbish and rotting wood, and the fire and the storm also vanish, the substance which had danced to those rhythms taking on other forms. For these events, selected and named by human anxiety, are embedded in a thousand others, and contain a thousand others, not distinguished by such scant and biased observation. And even such a homely and trivial event could not be described adequately without tracing the entire movement of the substances concerned in it, something impossible to human wit. The act of building is a form of motion just as material as the rush of wind or a fire. If they are architects so contemplative that they never make drawings, give orders, or otherwise move in the field of action, it is certain that they build nothing. Even sacraments and miracles cannot work without some material vehicle, and when God said, "Let there be light," this word must somehow have been an event in the material world. Otherwise, the light, bidden to be by an eternal will, would have always existed, and no event would have occurred. The subtle, instinctive impulses of eye and hand, and the pursuit of safety and comfort, by which the architect is led to build, or to plan, or to conceive building, are even more unimaginable to him, and more out of scale with his gross images, than the mysterious energies of wind and fire, and his own work of building is represented in his mind by some vague symbol, perhaps only by the bitter word labor, as if the fire were represented only by the fire fiend, or the wind by the god Notice. Certainly, such mythical or verbal symbols mark an advance in knowledge over merely enduring those events and those sensations. Important moral units have at least been discriminated and somehow named, but of the process and nature and the conditions of art such myths and names give no knowledge. They form a poetic physics which, even when grown trite and prosaic, remains merely pictorial and entirely specious, composed of images and words. Eventually, this lazy humanism in science may give place to mathematical accuracy, which is not less human for being more austere. The sciences cannot reenact nature in her own person. They are descriptions, artificial even if conscientious, of some part of her conduct. There is no better way of pointing to the most recondite truth than giving it a fair name. Science and mythology are both justified by this necessity, and are not enemies, though they may be rivals, because the names they give to things are appropriate in different directions. All that a critic can ask is that both myth and science should retain the modesty of names, noting facts without pretending to resemble them. External relations are those which at once unite and separate accidental neighbors, making possible a shock between them, an exchange of place, or even a substitution. External relations are perilous, and if any of the terms is an animate being, the other terms must remain dark and merely presumptive to its mind, vehicles of fate, never safe possessions either for the head or the heart. But such external relations are precisely those which define existence and distinguish it from essence. So the profound monition lies in this analysis. To hug anything existent as if it were thoroughly fathomed or possessed must be the beginning of a tragedy. Existing things are to be feared. Only their gifts can be loved, which they make to the spirit. Now, external relations might seem to be relations in space and time, yet this cannot be the case. If the space and time in question are given images possessing a specious unity and essence, neither pictorial space nor mathematical extension, which is an abstraction from pictorial space and its internal measure, can establish or contain truly external relations. The same is true of sentimental and of mathematical time. Parts of these essences are always parts of an inclusive whole, homogeneous with them, implied by them, and thoroughly perspicuous in its infinity. We need but recede for a few paces to render internal to the picture any parts of it which at first might have been out of range. No existence is involved either in the variety of these parts, if they are variegated, or in their union in the whole. None of them is ever cut off from the others by variable and hazardous relations. Everything fills its place and date, embedded in its continuous surroundings, the whole prospect being an image which existence generates, not a medium in which existence lives. The existence, as always when a mere essence is studied, lies in the subject, not in the object. It belongs to the act of intuition and to its necessary unknown organs. It is this act that, by a quick glance, lights up so much and no more of the picture and momentarily divides it into arbitrary parts. It is this act that lives precariously amid external relations and is being continually generated, redefined, and obliterated under their pressure. If I stop to admire and analyze space and time as they appear, existence has fled from those ghostly presences into my inquisitive person. It is in me, or behind my back, in the spirit thinking, or in the hidden forces that make it think. What the spirit may be to itself in its spiritual categories and dimensions does not here concern me. I am now pursuing the butterfly of existence, which an innocent philosophy thinks it can catch in the net of intuition and pin down in some graphic image, but existence is not there. I am enacting it, however, in this sad discovery, as those philosophers are in their light chase. It lodges precisely in our irrational encounter with some influence external to us, which causes us to select this or that winged appearance to fill our respective foregrounds. They and I coexist in our separation, as the speculative systems which we conceive cannot coexist in their contradiction. Doubtless on the same plane with our substantial selves, many other things exist, which we are endeavoring to survey and to synthesize in our systems. But when the mind strains to apprehend those existences, drawing their outlines and retaining their names and forms, it has turned from them to ideas. Those plotted miles have become a landscape. Existence and flux have fled from this new and clarified object which is only an essence, and have taken refuge in the agencies and in the process employed in evoking it. Existence was seated in the particular, and intuition has found only the universal. In my search for existence, then, I must look away from all these objects, these flowers of intuition, and must dig at its roots. Every fact is planted somewhere in the soil of nature, where it sets up a sort of boundary stone, a self-posited center, a point of meeting and transit for all such influences as help to produce it. If, as in the case from which I must start, the center is a seat of intuition, it supplies a point of view and origin for perspectives. These perspectives will be essences expressing the highly selective responsiveness of that center to surrounding things of various sorts at various removes. And since the center and intuition exist by an instinct, concretion, and self-isolation, those outlying facts will remain alien and problematical from its point of view. They, too, if they exist, must exist each for itself and be particular. The concretion which creates them, making the point they occupy a distinguishable center for action and reaction, need not carry any intuition with it. But intuition could have no existence and no meaning unless it arose in such a concretion and adopted its point of view. Thus all existences being or eyeing one another with suspicion and probably without understanding. Alternative positions, alternative characters are alone possible to them. If they cohabited and formed a placid whole, they would lapse into fragments of a picture, and if this picture itself was to exist, and not be a mere essence, it must in turn find lodgment in some concretion in the midst of flux, among things external to itself. If all existence is seated in some particular, and in that sense occupies a point, though not one in spacious time or space, and posits that point as a center for the universe, how can a universe effectively surround or condition this particular to which it is expressly foreign? It might seem as if an existent particular, self-posited and not merely a specious element in some image, was condemned to perpetual isolation. So the points of an existing space, if they have individuality, will be monads rooted forever in solitary safety. And if they had an inner history and dreamt of a world, that world would be specious and internal to their dream, not the world at all in which they actually existed. This consequence has been loyally accepted by at least two great systems, in the Sankhya system and that of Leibniz. But the plurality of monads in such a case is precarious. Why more than one dreamer or one substance? If we revert now to our original conception of a universe in which the particular was to be an element, how shall we say that this particular hedges itself in, so as to become concrete, and the sole seat of existence? What substance or forces dwell in this node or center which does not dwell in the medium in which it is placed and knotted? It will not help us to conceive the particulars packed close and continuous if this continuity is betrayed only by the internal state of each center. We revert to monadism. If it is an arrangement of particulars, a truth about them, not affecting their inner states, the medium of relation and the truth about the arrangement of units become more important than the units themselves, if these exist at all. They cannot be the sole existence. To combine continuity with discreteness is easy enough in mathematics, as it is in the images of sense, because no actual existence is seated either in the parts or in the whole, and all is a play of terms and definitions. But to combine them in act, to display them separately and yet together, is no task for thought. There must be an exchange of substance between form and form, an actual metamorphosis. Existence can lodge solely in particulars and yet can form a world out of them, if the particulars are in flux, so that one may become another, not by taking its place in a specious medium, by transmitting its substance or its motion to another particular, which in that extent and degree is its natural neighbor, the partner and rival of its life. Substance thus exists only in particulars. each standing on its own feet and adding itself to the universe without being included in any other particular or empty medium or observing mind. But these particulars could not exist or become parts of a universe without possessing an exchangeable substance called matter within or beneath them, which puts them in quantitative, genetic, dynamic, perilous relations with the other particulars in that universe. Flux and metamorphosis are therefore imminent, if not actual, in all existing things. Existence, like change, which is virtually contained in it, cannot be defined or contemplated adequately, because it is more and less than any essence which it may manifest. More because it enacts the character depicted, less because it enacts it blindly. Since to possess existence or to execute change is by no means identical with feeling an incubus or seeing emotion. Of course, it is impossible to attribute existence without having it, but this attribution is itself an act of animal faith, a disposition to action. Its meaning would vanish to a pure spirit devoid of self-consciousness and of fear. Even motion, perhaps, would lose its specious character, its flicker and precipitation, without the contrary impulses which successive stimulations arouse in the body, and the signs of which overtake one another in apprehension, giving us the feeling or intuition of change. In actual change, on the contrary, there is no such overlapping of contraries, but a pure succession of differences, so that the essence which reveals change to intuition, the essence of confusion and haste, is expressly absent from the true nature of change. Observation and language may nevertheless indicate sufficiently what existence is, as I am endeavoring to do here. Its nature is well expressed in the classical categories of substance and essence, matter and form, prakriti and purusha. Yet when we ask, as we are inclined to do in dialectic, what is the intrinsic essence of this substance, or the inherent form of this matter, apart or beneath all essences and forms, we are evidently in a hole. And yet it would be fatal to discard that elusive term and retain form only, because if we did so, we should be banishing the very existence which we were pursuing. Consider, for instance, the case of geometrical atoms, which offers the clearest possible picture of permanence combined with perpetual change. The atoms are absolutely solid and hard, the void perfectly motionless, yet in the changeless atoms keep up an incessant dance, forming endlessly new patterns. But how is matter within each atom distinguished from the space surrounding it? What sort of being or position has this dividing surface, with soft extension on one side of it and hard extension on the other? These notions of position and impenetrability dissolve on inspection. They can be nothing intrinsic. They hark back to specious effects, like colors and visible motions, or else to massed encounters with gross bodies in action. They require a center of reference and an agent or observer to lend them substance, scale, and position. A substance, scale, and position which will remain absolutely relative to his person. But from his point of view, the atoms, far from monopolizing existence, are its most ideal and notional limits. Indeed, the atoms of Democritus seem once to have been called ideas, and to have had the same Eleatic and Pythagorean origin as the ideas of Plato, but so taken they would be pure essences, terms in a dialectical construction which only the most reckless metaphysics could confuse with the existing world or regard as a substance. The effective constituents of nature must be things, not ideas. They must be posited, not defined. Perhaps at bottom Democritus still obeyed the mythological impulse of his nation, His philosophy may have been to him a sublime poetical transposition of this world rather than an analysis of explanation of it, a means of quitting and scorning it in a rapt union with eternal being. Otherwise, in relation to nature on the human scale, the atoms and the void would both seem less substantial than the temporary bodies formed out of them, since it is not the separate atoms nor the void, but the arrangement and motion of them which have sensible effects, so that the vicissitudes of experience which alone compel us to posit substance at all would be due to collocations quite accidental to the substances posited. It is evidently to the breath of change, to some wind blowing through those dusty spaces, that we owe our existence, not to the space and the dust to which we and our world will perhaps return when we have ceased to exist. Metaphysical transports are legitimate, but they elude the facts and leave them standing unexplained for the natural philosopher to decipher. Now, atoms of a sort, not geometrical ideas hypostaticized, have their place in the natural philosophy as we see in chemistry and physics, because the structure of matter is granular and existence is something initially dispersed and unequally distributed. But physical atoms are soft and essentially divisible. They are concretions in existence, and nobody knows how long they may last, or what they may contain. They are called atoms only in a relative sense, like any natural individual or animal. It figures like a microbe in the structure of some individual on a larger scale. In this sense, existence and flux always imply atoms and are composed of them, since existence and change must begin at a point and apart and can never achieve wholeness. But these atoms themselves, being existent, have no absoluteness or immortality. They are knots, bubbles, stitches, patches in the quilt. The merit of the atomic theory so understood is that it is a physical, not a metaphysical hypothesis. It does not divide things into dialectical elements, such as form and materia prima, which, being in essence, cannot exist by itself, but divides them into parts, such as they may be actually composed of, so that the atoms are not merely imagined, but often counted and discovered. In their presence, however, the philosopher is still at the beginning of his task, as he is in the presence of human society or of the heavenly bodies. He sees that existence is dispersed into many centers. He himself, with his whole present being and opinions, occupies one of them, and he must ask himself how these centers arise and dissolve, and how they are connected or transformed into one another. It will not help him at all if he merely becomes more learned or travels farther afield, thereby enlarging the picture which he has of the world. Memory, prophecy, and history, as well as science and spiritual insight, live in moments or a series of moments, even as matter lives. Intuitions are generated and lost like all other existences. Happy if in their day they frame some symbolic image of their sources and destiny, insofar as destiny and the causes of things must needs preoccupy a living animal. Yet happier if they are suffered to ignore those predicaments and existence itself, and can fulfill simply their intrinsic spiritual function, which is to express freely the spontaneous life of that center at that moment, in terms of such essences as may be native to it, as song is to the birds. Their existence would be at its best, but forgetful of existence. And all this ecstasy will only mislead the natural philosopher if he adopts its deliverance, and imagines that, because it is so fine a thing, it must convey a miraculous understanding of its own nature and origin. On the contrary, its very dignity lies in not needing to do so, and for the naturalist it is merely one more fact, one more moment of existence to be collated with all others. His own sensations and ideas, though less ecstatic, are in the same case. They too are spontaneous. He must discount them if he would recover his sanity and his scientific intent by interpreting them in action and treating them as conventional signs for his external relations. Thus, when I define existence as being in flux or in those external relations which make flux possible and likely, the meaning would elude me if these phrases did not prompt me to rehearse some actual transition, perhaps to abandon dialectic like Hume for backgammon. Since in talking about existence I actually exist, the fact appealed to is always at hand. My very perplexities in describing it exemplify it perfectly, and in slipping away and mocking me, existence perpetually surrenders to me its inmost secret. In one sense, my own existence is the only key to existence that is supplied to me. When I attribute existence to other things, hypostaticizing a given essence or dodging a flying missile without knowing what it may be, I, in some measure, personify the object and assimilate it dramatically to my own form of being. The element in me, however, which I project in conceiving existence is not my spirit, nor my human character, nor my discourse. It is not even the given essence which I use to describe my object in which I identify with it for the moment. For this essence is no element of itself. It appears to me only in the act of turning to the supposed object and taking it in. Or if, having become self-conscious, I suppose the given essence to be something in myself, like a dream, I should not be attributing existence to it in its specious medium, but to myself and my laboring spirit. This spirit would not be pure intuition, which can never determine what theme it shall choose, but some particular nucleus of massed images and intents, a life sundered from all else and from itself in its lapsing moments, something existent and in heavy flux. It is in fact this sort of dumb being within me, this material ballast, which assimilates me to the things which I believe to exist about me. I, too, to my own feeling and disbelief, am a weighted atom, an irrational substance full of stubborn habits and hidden springs, so that before assimilating other things to myself, I have assimilated myself to them, and I must exist, and feel myself to exist, by participating in material being in flux, before I can conceive their existence as a participation on their part in the force of this particular precarious existence which I enjoy. In a manner, indeed, all existence may be called personal. It is all enacted by particular beings in a particular context and occasion, and under the mask of a particular essence. But these personages may be dumb, they are willing to play in the dark without an audience. Soliloquies and shows supervene but rarely. The world is a pantomime which each clown plays silently to himself. His silly material antics are necessary if he is ever to supply an entertainment either for himself or for others. But bodies can have a place for a heart, and their private automatisms are the source of the public drama. Its moral passions merely re-echo on another plane the comic and tragic constitution of existence on the material level. Everywhere there is this fleeting concentration of substance in spheres and cells and bubbles, comparable to persons, everywhere the same excellent actor, matter, playing every part in its day, everywhere these exits and entrances of poetic characters coming from nowhere and disappearing into nothing. Existence is multifarious, inexhaustible. It is essentially sporting, and bobs up with the bravado and gaiety of youth, but its destiny is sad. The types it exemplifies down to the least detail are indeed eternal, and the substance which manifests them is no doubt perpetual. But the particular persons exult and triumph for an hour in an untenable position upon untenable claims. The flux of existence in which I am carried along with such slight courtesy cannot be dominated by my mind. I know it only as that opaque sea filled with more or less amiable monsters in which I am swimming. Much less can I define the inner nature of the matter thus indefinitely diffused, but in respect to the experiences and appearances within my ken, I may say that matter has the privilege of continuity and ambivalence. At any point it may become a nucleus, self-limited and concrete, with a character contrasted with the characters assumed by matter elsewhere. Yet even here it may presently surrender that character and assume another. Meantime, each concrete point is a center for a universe, and a fighting unit within it, not fighting for victory, though it may profess that purpose, but fighting in a common, immeasurable, and endless battle. For in a flux, victory is impossible, except to a spirit that views that flux tangentially, and lays up its achievements in the realms of truth and of essence, seeing that existence, in its very instability, continually takes some specific form and lends a historical individuality to each crisis through which it passes. That existence is in flux is, as I use these words, axiomatic, since it was by observing that I changed in surveying some essence at different moments and in different lights, in order to identify it or to analyze it, that I first discovered my own existence. But the flux of existence is not absolute. I mean, it does not pass from one instant of being to the next in such a manner that anything may follow upon anything, without these successive existences having a continuing relation to one another in sequence, place, quantity, and quality. Were this not so, and were the flux absolute, it could not properly be called a flux, because it would be impossible to define even the succession of its instants. Every state of the world would be one state of it, and would have no relation of before and after to the others. Indeed, the very condition of existence would be abolished, because there would be no change, either in each instant or from one to another. They would lie in no common field, and no substance would flow through them. That the flux is not absolute is another way of saying that nature is not chaos. There is order in it. Knowledge of one part can lead to true presumption about the character of other parts. Change, then, although perhaps pervasive, is not absolute. There are elements, material or formal, in it which endure through the change. The various notions of substance which I can frame are hypotheses about the character of this permanent element in the flux of existence. I may conceive it as a quantum of matter, or as a law of change absolutely obeyed everywhere, or as a guiding idea never perfectly realized, or as a purpose to be realized only at the end, or as a persistent effort to establish a particular order, never actually established at all, or as a persistent effort merely to destroy whatever order is established for the moment. Even this last, the most negative and romantic of connecting principles, will be something constant in the flux, enabling it to flow by subtending and linking its various phases. The universal no, the rebellion of the metaphysical will against each thing that it found, would at least relate them all to a common principle of self-hatred and instability, and perhaps it might establish an order of succession among them, if each successive state really eluded the evil conspicuous in its predecessor, before proving evil in its turn, and stimulating the will to destroy it also. Existence would be the art of jumping perpetually from the frying pan into the fire, and this tragic law would be the connecting principle of the world, otherwise sheer chaos. It would be a true bond, however, fantastically named or conceived, because it would ensure that the requisite sort of illusion and the requisite sort of distaste for it should never fail. That successive illusions should always have this relation of affording illusory relief. No other accident, no merciful hand should interfere with this monotonous vitality. So metaphysical, so falsely substantial is this evil deity, that ways of dethroning it may be devised and may succeed. It is so real that it may be destroyed. This would not be the case for a mere form, a passive description of what appearance happens to be. Such a fatality, which the Buddhists call karma, is a principle at work in appearance and producing it, so that if by some underhand or magic art I can dislodge the tyrant, the torments I suffer will cease. That some dominant principle, even if only the magic decree that change shall be perpetual, governs appearance, is a conviction common to all systems of nature, to all systems that can hope to institute an art of life. Without such a subtending principle, no general proposition could be framed about the methods of nature. The most superstitious and fantastic magic recognizes a sort of legality, proportion, and meticulous order to which its miracles must conform. One word gone wrong, or one rite omitted, defeats the whole incantation. There is accordingly a ground presumed for everything, if only we could discover it. The systems of nature that call themselves critical and that think they discard substance merely revert to belief in magic, only instead of embodying this magic, as primitive men do, in material things or in the sounds of words, they attribute it to disembodied laws. These laws are, in function, the substance of nature in their view, but they are not called substance because they are not distributed materially among things, nor internal to events, but their externality and their brooding over events from a higher sphere would properly cause them to receive the name of substance, as did the Platonic ideas, when once their individuality and authority were clearly established. For they would live forever in their own realm, and on their own occasions would call nether facts into existence, or cause them to disappear. There can be nothing more substantial than a superior principle that governs existence against its will. The conception of substance as a formal principle, a law or Platonic idea, belongs both to superstition and to criticism. In the one case, it is regarded as a magic fate; in the other case, as a habit of events, regarded as phenomena in experience, not as events in nature. That the substance of things is their Platonic ideas is a wonderful conception, a sort of philosophic rendering of polytheism. It is a view of substance proper to a lover or a poet. It does not exclude, indeed, ultimately it implies, that there is also another substance in things, namely matter, but it overlooks this internal substance, the principle of their temporal, local, and changing existence, in order to place behind and above them, as the true principle of their being, the essence which they suggest to the mind, without fully or constantly embodying it. It is as if I asked things what they are, and they replied, "We cannot tell thee what we are, and we do not know nor care, but will tell thee what we wish to be. What we wish to be is the origin and goal of our being. It is like the meaning which words are invented to convey, and which remains when they have been uttered. The breath and the few noises that carry a winged word lapse as it is uttered, and we will not identify ourselves with things so frail and ephemeral, and so hard to seize or to find, but we will identify ourselves with the meaning of that word, with the message it lived to give, and that it is a part forever of the meaning of things, or the divine mind and intention. From that mind and intention we came like a half-articulated cry, and that we also end, and find our eternal rest and perfection. Apart from the need of supplementing this higher substance above things with a material substance within them, which would ultimately account for their whole being and fortunes, there is one difficulty with this Platonic metaphysics, which renders it impossible seriously to regard the ideals of things as their principle. This difficulty is that the flux of things is far more radical than the Greeks supposed. It is not an oscillation about a few types, but a profound and irrecoverable transformation of types and goods and meanings and ideals. Undoubtedly, each of these types, taken as an essence, is eternal, but so are the essences of all monsters and changelings and hybrids. There is not in nature any constancy to particular types. To suppose such constancy is an illusion like that proper to persons who speak only one language or have heard only of one religion, and suppose that they are universal, unchangeable, and alone constant with the nature of things. Platonic ideas do not govern nature, but nature, in falling into this or that form, suggests for a while some Platonic idea or other to the contemplative mind. The ideality of this idea, the perfection which it expresses over against the imperfection of the facts, being supplied by the poetic mind of the observer, either because it is easier or pleasanter for him to conceive it so transformed, or because he is led by sympathy with the movement of the actual thing to divine and to prefigure what it would grow into if it could. But these goals of thought or of life change with the changes in earthly circumstances and in animal structure, and a new set of ideas, like a new elective government, is called by the self-governing world to rule over it in a name, but never to be obeyed, unless they are careful to command only what the people are bent on doing. Pictorial space and sentimental time form together an airy canvas on which dramatic fancy has always painted the world. If these media of distribution are visionary, is there some better principle of relation on which I may conceive existence to be distributed? For intuition, there is no better principle, because if I sought to discard those familiar perspectives in favor of any logical harmony or tragic law, I might devise some nobler form of poetry, but certainly not a more accurate or a deeper science. Pictorial space and sentimental time, after all, yield images of nature, a conceptual law, a begriff, would be only a death mask of discourse. Yet, although radically the terms of science must remain visionary, there are methods of using and discounting them which can render them wonderfully pliant to the truth of things. Yet by inflection and syntax may compel them to designate unmistakably almost any physical or moral object. So the symbols of sense and the emotional perspectives of life may be made to declare the movement of substance and its secret ways. However private and singular may be the note by which observation marks the conjunctions of events, this mark, being a product of those occasions, an integral part of those loaded moments, cannot fall out of step with them, nor can it misrepresent their order if it registers its own. A common contingency unites any perception with its instant object, so that memory, if true to experience, reports the true order of those natural events which it records at all, no matter how abstract or poetical may be its view of them. Nor is this order immaterial to those events. On the contrary, the contingent distribution of things is precisely what distinguishes them from their essences and lends them existence, so that the most Heraclite observation can retain just the element in facts which matters for animal life, namely, the distribution of those facts and their effect on the observer implicated in their movement. The pragmatic mind may accordingly cultivate a double economy. It may ignore at once the internal aesthetic character of its perceptions and the internal substantial character of things, and it may attend solely to their common march and external mutual relation. But a difficulty arises here. A fatal vagueness hangs about this abstract notion of events. For where are they occurring? In what medium shall they be deployed? If it be only, as commonly is with pragmatists, in sentimental time, natural philosophy would be eliminated altogether, and nothing would remain but a limping autobiography, or a romantic social dream. There is, however, another method by which the reform of spectacular physics may be attempted, namely, to substitute mathematical for sensuous essences in the description of nature. The triumphs of this method are notorious. By its internal elaboration and by its application in astronomy and in the arts, it has made modern science and life essentially modern, complex, aimless, and ugly, no doubt, but also rich and wonderfully agile. The mathematical method, however, if pursued alone, could never have reformed physics. It would have been an exploration in the realm of essence, irrelevant to the description of nature and to the arts. In order to be relevant to fact, mathematics must somewhere impinge upon it. But where? All ideas impinge upon fact initially, and that they are images bred by the senses and passions in contact with things. But this is not enough. Every lie, every fancy, every dream rises out of contact with fact initially. So do all systems of dialectical metaphysics, and mathematics, for all its rigor, would be, like them, only an attenuated phenomenon if, like them, it was attached to nature only because nature once suggested it to the mind. In fact, mathematics is the most practical of sciences. indispensable and never misleading to the merchant, the architect, and the navigator. It has abstracted from things just that aspect of them by which they interact and grow out of one another. In other words, their substantial aspect, the aspect by which human action, which works with material instruments, can itself control them. Thus, mathematics impinges upon fact at a second point, at the crux of action. It is applicable in the arts, rendering them exact and economical. It thereby proves its validity not merely as a dialectical dream emanating from things, but as a measure of their intrinsic operation. It joins hands here with the pragmatic method, which studied in things only the practical significance which they might have for one another. At the same time, it rescues this pragmatic method from the dreadful predicament to which it led while it remained empirical. It joins hands here with the pragmatic method, which studied in things only the practical significance which they might have for one another, and at the same time, it rescues this pragmatic method from the dreadful predicament to which it led while it remained empirical. For now, experience is not condemned any longer to designate events merely by the notes which memory may keep of them, nor to deploy them vaguely by virtue of some blind expectation or social instinct. Now the whole distribution of things to any depth or distance to which calculation may be carried can be determined scientifically and verified step by step as occasion arises. And if the universe so deployed is conceived abstractly, for how else should it be conceived by a local animal mind? At least it is conceived in sympathy with its fundamental order. Its curve is plotted, its framework is distinguished, its nerve is traced. And if the very life and music that may play about it remain unknown, or are imagined but partially in some myth, half self-indulgent and half sympathy, at least no fair thing is denied its occasion, and no false lights are dangled before the idle or superstitious humors of mankind. The arithmetic and geometry of commerce, learned by the manipulation of things, are naturally applicable to these things in rough experiment, prophecy, and industry. They are perhaps not applicable without variation at depths or heights in nature remote from the human scale, and they are not at all applicable directly to psychological or moral subjects, but they are not irrelevant to anything existent, because they are methods of noting its distribution, so that even where appearances elude scientific measure by their essence, they do not escape it by their occasions. It still applies to the causes that subtend them. In proportion as these causes are discerned, medicine and politics become true arts, and the ancient incubus of unimaginable power, to be exercised only by magic, is lifted from the soul. To discern the causes of things, that is, to penetrate to the level on which their movement is connected and calculable, is an immense task, which will still beckon the last of mortals. It demands of man that he abandon the human scale, which he can do only in intent by acrobatic intellectual art, which is very fatiguing and jejune. He can practice it only occasionally, and he hardly brings back from those abstract flights any warm conviction to his animal spirit. He must remain to the end a passionate, polyglot, incoherent poet. This fatality will appear even in those threads of science which he may weave about his heart. They will be various, tangled, and often broken short, and their texture, as distinguished from the intellectual function which they are intended to have, will still be his own, that is, it will still be visionary. For example, there is the notion of natural law. This is a name for certain tropes, certain rhythms or typical repetitions, discernible in certain abstracted aspects of things. A law has nothing to do with the actual genesis of anything. Particulars are never repeated. They are always new and somewhat different, and their family likenesses or family habits, while they leave on the observer a certain common trace in a single image, cannot have arisen in the first instance because they were destined to arise in many other instants later. Nor can these later instances be due to the specious, unitary aspect which the earlier instances were to the mind. Presumably, the repetition of a trope must be due to the same sort of causes by which its first appearance was produced. Law is accordingly a device in discourse, not a principle in nature. Why do men of some races have thick beards and women none? Because, says the sapient discerner of law, males always have them. This answer satisfies the wondering mind and domesticates it in the home circle of appearances. But if beards have an origin at all, and are not detachable phenomena sprinkled by providence over experience, the origin of each beard must lie within each man, and their common characters, which are not exactly repeated, must be due to a generic resemblance between prior structure of one body and that of another in the males of that race. Crossbreeding, or spontaneous variation, or castration may at any moment so modify that structure that no beard grows, and this not by virtue of a new law, which of course might be propounded by generalizing from the new instances, but by a traceable derivation each body from its germ, its food, and its particular fortunes in the environment. In the notion of law, accordingly, an empirical abstraction, a single image or formula, like a name, is clapped impulsively on such things as recall it to the mind. It does not penetrate anywhere to the origin of anything. It applies only to those things from which it has been or may be abstracted. And if any power is attributed to law to bring about its own exemplification, belief in law is simple superstition, for then the sheer force with which the form of some event may have struck the mind becomes an assurance that such events must be repeated. But repeated when? Not every law applies everywhere, and whether a particular case contains the particular features which are the premises for a particular law is a point often discoverable only by waiting to see whether the required conclusion is realized. If I die, I prove that I must have suffered from a mortal accident, sentence, or disease, a mortal ill being one from which death follows by law. But if the actual disease or accident or sentence had been noted independently, it would still be uncertain whether it was mortal. So, if a ray is refracted more than the accepted laws of physics allow, the true laws of physics are discovered, requiring this greater degree of refraction. Natural law is a matter of more or less summary notation, a matter of words, and yet by the discovery of law and by the intelligent expectation based upon it, civilization has been built up. Civilization is a new organization of habits. When these come to be controlled by institutions, external instruments, and maxims, instead of by instinct, though a natural law be nothing but a specious essence and a mental symbol, the conception of it may mark an important progress in the domination of things by human intelligence and art. The one great natural law, at once the charter of freedom and of necessity, is this, that similar things under similar circumstances change in the same ways. This conditional uniformity in nature is a fact. It appears in the revolution of the heavens, in the generation of plants and animals, in political change, and in all the arts. This fact is also necessary because if two exactly similar things under identical circumstances acted differently, it would not be the nature of either thing that controlled the issue, but insofar as it was variable, chance, or a fresh creation. Chances and fresh creations may occur for all we know. The groundless is everywhere the ground of everything. The radical facts and habits in nature are perfectly arbitrary, and everything might originally have been different. Why, then, should it not become different little by little, or all at once? Believers in miracles and metamorphoses, in enormous unknown worlds, and in final cataclysms think of nature as she deserves. If their view betrays any human weakness, it is only in the reasons or flattering functions which they assign to these thunderbolts. But where chance enters, chaos begins. If a thing should behave under identical conditions, now in one way and now in another, it would prove itself to that extent impotent and non-existent. Neither result would be its work or its child, but an alien something would have arisen wantonly in its place. A specific manner of reacting under given conditions is the very nature of a specific thing. Such a fixed native propensity defines the various atoms, it defines the soul, it defines the world itself. Therefore, this necessity is identical with freedom and life. Propensities to change cannot be deduced from the essence illustrated in anything at any one moment. An essence has no propensities, and indicates none. It has only affinities, such as blue may have to red, the cherubs to the zebras, or the circle to the spiral. When an essence is caught or found under irrelevant circumstances, since there are no circumstances in the realm of essence, it is shown to be the essence of a thing. This thing will disclose tendencies to specific transformations due not to its essence, but to the substance now beneath that essence and in the world beyond. A thing has a heart as well as a face, and its heart is set either on preserving its actual essence as long and as well as it may, or else on running through and exhibiting a chosen series of phases, a trope, which shall manifest its secret nature. In the first case, the thing is inert or inanimate. In the second, it is animate and alive. If an inanimate thing did not preserve stolidity in its being, only crumbling or exploding at random, as other things may dictate, or if an animate thing did not hasten, as soon as allowed, to unfold its particular innate burden, that inanimate thing would have no nature, and this animate thing no soul. Thus, predetermination, a profound inveterate bias in will and effort, is the very condition of existence. A creature without it would be a nothing. Not that many an animal is not loosely put together and scatterbrained, a wayward spirit, or several warring spirits moving within him. He then acts on one principle or on another, according as external influences for the moment perfect his various impulses. In adults this seems a contemptible weakness, but in children it renders education possible, by systematically stimulating one habit and inhibiting another. The trainer may consolidate a tender nature and instill the national virtues into any waif. Circumstances create character, and although this fact is disguised and may seem to be contradicted, where inherited qualities are many and determinate, it is confirmed when we look deeper to the origin of all inheritance. How should nuclei first arise in substance at all, except by the distinction which position and surroundings bestow on one aggregate and not on others? Spontaneous variation in seeds is a change externally caused. It comes from some accident of temperature, nutrition, or pressure upon a germ. The same influences which cause the seed to grow and to develop somewhat individually after it is formed cause it to be formed somewhat individually in the first instance. The adoption of a new trope in nature can never be the work of a soul, herself the trope previously instituted and hereditary. Alien circumstances must shift her balance in the night, without her consent or knowledge. At every stage in life, some actual heritage is compelled by circumstances to unfold itself not as it would, but as it may. By the warping or accretion involved, that heritage itself is modified, so that the more plastic and long-lived a creature is, the more it becomes the image of its fortunes, and other than its original dowry and instinct required. Nor will the seed of the next generation issue unchanged from such a battered or accomplished parent. Modification will ensue, not such as to transmit the aged features or acquire gifts of the father to his offspring, but some random change due to nutrition or other circumstances, affecting the formation of the seed mechanically. Thus life will be transmitted with a slightly different twist. Only the event will show whether for the advantage or disadvantage of the young in their future environment, itself not identical with that of their ancestors. Life is a burden laid on the living, a terrible compulsion to be and to be after a certain arbitrary fashion. Hence early tears when the will may not have its way, hence alacrity in youth in trying its powers, and peace in old age at having released them. When bodies are very similar and their environment of the same sort, as homogeneous atoms would be in a void or stars in the heavens, each and all will always keep doing the same thing. The history of each may then be erected into a law for all. This common trope will be called mechanism or natural necessity. When the environment is diversified, or when the bodies in it are dissimilar, each at each moment will do something unprecedented in that society. This unprecedented movement will be exactly that which any similar body would have performed under like circumstances. But since in the system this situation has never arisen before, this sort of movement will be novel in it. It could not have been anticipated by any observer of that world so far. It will therefore be called spontaneous, emergent, and free. That under such circumstances such a substance would always undergo just such a change is not merely a guess or a postulate. It is an analytic truth and a matter of definition. If two eggs looked exactly alike, even under the microscope, but one produced a chicken and the other a duckling, this result would of itself prove that the eggs were of a different species. And this would be certain even without appealing to the concomitant fact, doubtless discoverable, that one had been laid by a hen and the other by a duck. Even if this diverse origin could not be traced, and the presumable difference in structure in the two eggs were imperceptible, they would not be perfectly similar except graphically. That is, they would present for the moment an identical essence to human observation, without on that account being identical substances. For genetically and dynamically, as substances actually exist and are inwardly distinguished, these similar moments would not be separate units at all, but parts of a trope including now one context and now another. As a word in one sentence is not graphically or audibly different from the same word in another sentence, yet has a different efficacy and sequel in discourse, inasmuch as it is an integral part of a different phrase and discourse in its substance and genetic principle. It is not a juxtaposition of separate syllables, but a series of vocal gestures and explosions which come to the surface by force of habit in words more or less trite and familiar to lexicographers. These separable words are but the shells and husks of that expressive movement by which discourse bursts from moment to moment into flower, like a miraculous tree. So the eggs hatching into different fowls, even supposing what is so incredible, that they were graphically identical, and the flux of substance would not be units separable from their different sequels. Not that a trope has any mysterious material unity, and cannot be cut in half or nipped in the bud, but at whatever point it is cut short, it lapses into tropes of some other order, tropes of some kind being the minimal units of a flux, and a flux being indispensable to existence. An event is the transit of an essence across the background of substance, diversifying its pervasive properties and immeasurable extent. This incident summons the substance itself into existence, which otherwise would have remained a sleeping monster, the essence of a substance and not a substance in act. And at the same time, that incident introduces some particular trope into the context of matter, and makes it the form of an actual fact. The execution of some particular movement, however slight and brief, is requisite to mark a moment in the life of nature. It is also requisite in order that nature may live at all or exist, because if she exhibited one or more essences, however complex, without transitions between them, she would not be nature. There would be no genesis in her, no maternity, and nothing would exist. Tropes, the assuming and dropping of essences in sequence, are the minimal facts. Essences not so taken up and surrendered by a substance would have no preeminence over the infinitude of other essences, not even such relative eminence as to compose a realm of truth. Nothing would emphasize them or extract them from the realm of essence, a function which only an irrational principle can perform, which is at once lasting and changeful. The units of natural being are accordingly tropes, the simplest as well as the most complicated of them being original. The elements in any trope, and a trope is a recognizable sequence of distinguishable elements, taken separately neither imply nor create its total movement. If arrested ideally or by material accident at any point, the trope would not show at that segment any evidence of its dynamic destiny. Nothing would marry that segment ostensibly to its origin or its sequel, but it would be merged indiscriminately in the total constellation of the universe at that moment, which is geometrically and graphically infinitely complex and chaotic. If a projectile be arrested ideally or accidentally at a single point in its path, it will not offer to inspection any evidence of its velocity. Nevertheless, it would have a particular velocity in reference to any system of surrounding bodies. The instants of geometrical time are not units of physical being. They can contain and exhibit essences only, whereas the units of physical being are definable by tropes, and are measured and multiplied by superposing tropes on one another. The analysis of existence is the resolution of tropes into minor tropes, or the composition of wider tropes out of them. The issue will in each case be novel, compared either with the constitutive elements engaged or with the large fact dissolved into its components. But the genesis traced, whether forward or backwards, will always be natural. That is, it would always occur under like circumstances. All hangs on the direction of the observer's eye. Looking backward from what to him is a culmination, he finds elements in which it is not contained. Looking forward from the elements to any sequel which they may have, he finds nothing but those elements engaged in producing it. There is no further difference between mechanism and vital initiative, necessity and free will, events predictable and events unpredictable, and quarrels on the subject are a sad waste of moral heat.